I'm not gonna lie. I had a great childhood. I had loving parents. I still do. I got along with my sister. All of my family took care of me and brought me up the best way they could. Most of them were university teachers and researchers, so I also had a pretty big bank of knowledge at my disposal. We never had too much money since my country was going through a pretty bad economic crisis during my younger years. But it was enough to get us a nice little house next to my grandparents, my old man's mom and dad. We were always extremely close. I loved knitting and taking care of the garden with my grandma and watched football matches and carpentering with my grandpa. My school days went pretty smoothly. I didn't have the best grades, but they were good enough. So at 18, when I finally finished high school and managed to get into a good college, my grandparents decided that they were going to give me a pretty amazing gift. I was going to spend a month with them traveling through Spain. For the most part, I had a good time, as expected. The trip bonded us even further, and I loved every minute of our time, seeing beautiful art and architecture. But none of that mattered, compared to what happened in a single, fateful night. I have denied and shrugged off the memories for an unbearably long time, but something made me remember. And nothing will ever be the same again. I probably will never, ever again forget what I went through. No matter how hard I try to block them out of my life again, the memories will consume me. This is why I must tell my story before it is lost forever. It all started during the third week of the trip. We had already visited Madrid, Segovia, and Toledo. Next up was Granada, home of La Alhambra, the most lavish of the Arab palaces in the Iberian Peninsula. It had been the final bastion of resistance of the last Moorish king, where he spent the final days of his reign, a fairy tale town. Too bad it was filled to the last inch with tourists. We were standing at a hotel called Leonardo. I remember that we arrived at night, about 8 p.m., after a 4-hour-long train trip. The lobby was pretty nicely decorated and shiny, and the staff was nice, so we weren't expecting in the least bit what we were going to find upstairs. It was a pretty tall building for Granadan standards. We were staying in the second to last floor, the 10th if I remember correctly. This meant that we had a good view of the whole city, and that was pretty much the only good thing about the place. The corridor leading to our room was old and musty, covered in a pink and peach striped wallpaper that had suffered a few decades of constant humidity, probably from a leaking pipe. It had a low ceiling with a long row of dim lights and a carpeted floor with a grayish hue to it that had probably once been beige. The room itself wasn't too different, with the added discomfort of an old bathroom, stained bed sheets, and an old springy mattress that could have been at least twice my age. Nothing like what we had seen in the pictures. Nonetheless, we were more interested in the city itself than the boring old hotel, so we unpacked as quickly as we could and went out for a nocturnal bite and a short walk. Before going out, though, we complained to one of the receptionists about the state of our room. He politely explained this particular hotel had passed through several owners and hotel chains, like an old hand-me-down that no one really wanted, but accepted anyway. Apparently, the owners had only bothered to refurbish the lobby and left the rest of the building just as they found it. Fair enough. The hotel staff had nothing to do with the owner's carelessness. Plus, we had already paid for our stay and did not have the time nor the will to find another place. So we had our supper, got the feel of the town, and came back at about 11. The first night was surprisingly not bad. We were completely exhausted from the long train ride and wanted nothing more than to get our fair share of sleep. And that we did. I woke up after a dreamless night. I hadn't even noticed the hardness of the old mattress. I felt great. It all started when we were getting ready to leave our room that morning. It was 9:10 when we heard a low knocking on the door, and then there came the voice. "Cleaning service." It was an old lady's voice, with a deep Spanish accent. I opened the door and let her in. I gazed at her while she greeted us with a good morning in barely understandable English. She was a very peculiar old woman. Her wrinkled skin was rather pale, but it was covered in brown stains from years of exposure to the sun. Her hands looked rugged and calloused, roughened by years of hard work. She had deep, teary green eyes that contrasted with her silky black mane. I couldn't help but stare at it. Her hair looked so soft that it could have belonged to a 10-year-old. Only the odd gray hair gave it away. We finished grabbing our things and were about to get out, when I suddenly remembered that I'd forgotten to grab my wallet. I told my grandparents to meet me downstairs and went back in the room. Quickly, I searched for the wallet on the nightstand, but it wasn't there. I was reaching under the bed when suddenly the woman said, "Don't worry, I already picked it up." She reached out her hand. I thanked her and took the wallet, and as I did, our skin touched. Her skin felt damp and cold. Too cold. For an instant, it felt as if the body had been filled up with melted ice. A sudden urge to get the old lady out of my sight as fast as possible grew inside me. So I quickly said goodbye and practically ran out of the room. But as I was closing the door, I felt the coldness grow inside me once again and turned around. The cleaning lady was staring directly into my eyes, smiling a knowing smile. The smile said that she was in on the joke, and I was not. I slammed the door shut. For the rest of the day, I had the old woman in the back of my mind. Every time I zoned out, I would remember that seemingly unexplained coldness I had felt deep in my bones. To my great satisfaction, though, I still managed to have a good time. I had managed to convince myself of the irrationality of being scared by a simple old lady. I was such a wuss. But by the time we returned to the hotel that night, I was crossing my fingers in hopes that I wouldn't have to see that woman ever again. My grandparents decided that they were going to stay at the 24-hour lobby bar for a while to grab some tea, but I decided to go straight to our room. I was ready to sleep tight and get ready for one more final tourist's day of non-stop walking in Granada. It wasn't to be. Before getting in bed, I got the sudden urge to have a hot shower. It had been a long day and I deserved it. It was a long shower. While the water flowed through my hair, I thought about how happy the three of us were, and of all the pictures and postcards where we were going to bring back home. But then the cleaning lady came into my mind once again, and I started to get anxious. Why hadn't my grandparents come up yet? I was about to grab a towel and get out, when I heard a loud bang. The lights suddenly went out, and the water got cold. A power failure. Oh well. I should have expected it from a building in such bad conditions. Naked, wet, and in the dark, I blindly reached for my phone and turned on my flashlight. It was exactly 12 o'clock. Why hadn't my grandparents come back? I wrapped the towel around my waist and reached for the door handle while holding my phone in the other hand. The door didn't budge. I tried harder, but nothing happened. The door was stuck. What terrible timing. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Great, my grandparents had come. "Grandma? Grandpa? Are you there?" I called out. No answer. I called out again. Still no reply. I started to get anxious. If it wasn't my grandparents, then who the hell was in our room? And what reason would they have to not reply to my calls? The footsteps continued. I tried the handle again and was about to try to slam my body against the door, but luckily thought twice before doing it. If the person that had come in my room didn't want me to open the door, Was it a good idea to confront him? After all, if he was armed, the encounter could get me badly hurt or worse. So I locked the bathroom door on my side as a safety measure and decided to call 911, but then I remembered that I didn't have any service. I hadn't bothered to buy a phone chip for the trip, so I tried the internet, but of course, it had gone out along with the electricity. I was getting desperate. The footsteps continued outside the room for a few seconds, and suddenly, I froze. The footsteps were nearing the bathroom door. This was getting out of hand. And then I heard it. The knocking. Only one thought filled my mind. The cleaning lady. Everything hit me all at once. I felt her outside my door. It was the same agonizingly cold, wet feeling from that morning, but way, way worse. It was the same feeling you get when that freezing early winter rain hits you hard on the face, but deep, deep inside your bones. And there was dread, too. Bucket loads of dread filling my heart. What could she possibly want from me? Was that thing outside the bathroom door even a she? It was too much, and so I froze. My knees turned to rubber and I collapsed into the corner. Unthinking and unmoving, I was knocked out of my state of trance by a sudden bang. The woman, or should I say, creature, that stood outside the bathroom had grown tired of knocking. It banged on the door, harder and louder this time. The door wasn't holding much longer. At this point, the adrenaline had kicked in. I placed my phone on the counter, grabbed the toilet's ceramic lid, and got ready to hit whatever monster came through the door. Suddenly, the door opened violently. What was standing right in front of me did not look like a monster. There was no mistaking what I managed to see from the dim glow coming from my phone's flashlight. It was the cleaning lady, all right, but she looked nothing like what I had seen that morning. Her perfectly black hair had grown longer. It was so long that it spread around the floor like spilled water. She stood naked and still, right at the door, looking straight at me, unblinking. What I saw when I looked at her eyes made me grow still, letting the adrenaline fade away and the coldness and dread take me once again. They were not the deep green shade from earlier that day anymore. In fact, they weren't any color at all. They were white, completely white. A pair of colorless, lifeless balls. Then she started walking towards me, in a perfect line, as if she were being guided by a vector. I dropped my weapon. It was the least human walk I'd ever witnessed. It was as if a creature, some unknown, dark being, had put on a suit and was trying and failing to look like a member of our species. The beast in the old woman's body walked in the same otherworldly fashion until it got right next to me and opened its mouth, revealing a set of perfectly white teeth. I was completely paralyzed. It opened its mouth so wide that its jaw started to crunch and its skin to tear. A gray liquid started to pour from its throat. In that moment, I realized what it was about to do. I felt it in my gut. It was going to take a bite. It was going to feed. Yet I couldn't move. The coldness just wouldn't let me. Then there was another feeling. Acceptance. My body had given up to the creature. I was to be a part of it, a new skin for its collection, just like the one it was wearing right now. Out of nowhere, I heard a second bang from somewhere in the building, and light filled my eyes. The power was back. I blinked for the first time in what felt like a million years, and when I opened my eyes, there was nothing in front of me. It was gone. I closed my eyes for one last time that night. The next time I opened them, I was no longer in the bathroom corner. I was laying in my bed the next morning. It was as if absolutely nothing had happened. Had it all been a terrifyingly real nightmare? That is what my body led me to believe. As a coping mechanism, my brain made me forget. It made me think of the events of that night as mere products of my imagination. And it worked. The rest of the trip went by just as expected. I came home just as expected, and continued on with my life just as expected. This was 4 years ago. Every time I came close to thinking about the events of that dreadful night, a cerebral mist clouded my memory. 2 days ago, something clicked. Something that made everything come back to me. It was as if a ticking time bomb had been planted that night in my brain, just waiting for the right time to explode. One night, out of nowhere, I started to dream. My first dream was a perfect recollection of that terrible night, ending just seconds before I succumbed to the creature. Ever since, I had been blanking out several times a week, losing track of time and forgetting whole parts of my day. Spans of several hours have been getting blurry. But the worst part of my day is nighttime, when everything comes back to me. A dream of coldness, of death. Sometimes I can see people, scared people, a dark being always closing in on them, but they can't move, can't run. The cold won't let them. I never got to see the end of those nightmares, not that I needed to. I have considered several times visiting a psychiatrist, but I don't think it'll do any good, and I'm pretty sure I know why, even if I don't want to say or think it. I have since come to terms with my fate and the inevitability of the truth, so I'll tell it to you as a final goodbye. I think that night in Granada, I might not have escaped the monster after all. Recently, an old friend of mine called me up in a panic. Now, we hadn't spoken in years, so this caught me off guard. I asked him what happened, but he just kept mumbling loudly and blubbering. He eventually gained his composure and started talking coherently. Before I share what he said, I'll need to give you a little background. I've known this person since grade school. His name was Harold Lewitsky. He was pretty quiet and a little idiosyncratic. I was his only real friend, at least to my knowledge, and that's why he spent the most time with me. I guess I felt bad for him. He was an only child, so he got pretty lonely, and that's why I was always invited to come over to his place. He would mostly spend his time in a specific room he referred to as the other room. It was one of those unfinished rooms where you could see the wooden ceiling beams and concrete walls, the ones usually used for storage or as a workshop. It was at the very end of a small corridor connecting to the basement, pretty deep in the house. That was the only room I was never allowed to go into, and I didn't mind either, because I never liked that place. It always made me feel on edge when around it. I don't know if it was a placebo or something. It just made me feel paranoid without any real reason to be worried about it. Anyway, Harry would go in there and wouldn't come out until dinner was ready. After that, we would play a few of his video games on his PS2, and usually go home, and Harry would go back into the basement. Strange behavior for sure. It wasn't until one summer day that I asked what Harry did down there. I don't know why it took me so long to ask that question. He said he had some sort of collection of figurines he'd play with. I thought that was pretty weird. What kid plays with figurines anymore? I asked him what he did with them. He said he'd use them to make sure he wouldn't get mad at me. I thought he was referring to his dad. I don't really remember his dad, come to think of it. But when I said that, he just sat there with his head down. That's when I got really curious. I started to poke my nose into things I shouldn't have. This one time when me and Harry were playing Call of Duty, I snuck into the basement. I wanted to know what Harold really did down there, in that other room. I approached the door, but I was hesitant to open it. Like I would see something traumatizing behind the door. I opened it anyway, and I was hit with this blast of cold air and a musty smell. It was chilly and damp down there, dark as well. I flipped on the light switch, and as I did, Harry asked me what I was doing down there. How had he gotten down here so silently? I rambled off some BS excuse, and he just walked past me into the other room like nothing happened. This put me off of any plans of trying to infiltrate the other room, but I asked around and actually found someone who got in. He was a 10th grader at my school who lived down the street. Him and his brother went to Harry's place because Harry had a new video game which he wanted to play with someone. When they got to Harold's house, they immediately went for the other room. Zach, the eldest brother, went in first. Like me, they wanted to know what Harry was up to down there. When Zach tried to turn on the light switch, though, it didn't work. They somewhat expected this, which is why they brought flashlights. Zach and his brother looked around in the dark room with their flashlights for what had to be half an hour. They never found any figurines or even any toys, just empty and dusty wooden shelves. Zach heard his brother gasp from the opposite side of the room, so he went over to see what happened. When he got there, the youngest brother, Jonathan, was shining his flashlight on a section of the concrete wall. On the wall was an outline of an old man's face, or something akin to that. It could have just been pareidolia, he said, but it looked synthetic, like it was meant to be there for us to see. 2 slit-like cracks in the concrete formed a pair of squinted eyes, and a rocky deposit between the eyes formed a lopsided nose. There were several stains on the walls surrounding the face that ran down in streaks that took the form of a beard. And the thing that scared me the most, he said, was a large dent beneath the nose that looked almost exactly like a screaming mouth. He said it just looked so wrong. After that, they hightailed it out of there. On the way out, Zach's flashlight dropped, and as it did, it fell in such a way as to where it pointed upwards, revealing the ceiling. He said that there weren't any light bulbs in the first place. They were just empty sockets. It was so weird, and for a brief moment before the flashlight landed, he swore he saw someone's face staring at him from one of the air duct's vents. Their mouth was wide open, no teeth, just an open maw. Zach said he was sure someone was stalking them in there. He wouldn't talk to me after that. I decided to ask Harold's mom about the other room. She said that Harold would spend the majority of his day down there. She didn't even know what he did down there. She just assumed he was with his dad. I thought that was a strange comment. I couldn't even remember if I'd ever seen him. She said that Harry would only come out of the other room to get food or something. She said she didn't like that room either. It gave her the creeps. She said sometimes Harry would watch her sleeping from the closet. She always thought he was sleepwalking. Occasionally, she'd hear sounds coming from the other room while Harry was in there. Faint, distant ones, like hushed talking. She couldn't make out what they were talking about, but she thought she could hear certain phrases like, "keep listening" and "go back in." This one time, she was hearing a bunch of thudding coming from the basement, and Harry comes thundering up the stairs in a panic, He's rambling on about how something went wrong, but when she tried asking him what happened, he just stalked off into his room. She went downstairs to check on everything, and she sees the other room's door is wide open. That door is always shut tight. Weird happenings for sure. So now to the part you've all been waiting for. The phone call. Harry said that he was revisiting his old place, the one with the other room. While he was there, he was checking out the basement. When he went to where there should be the door to the other room, it was just more wall. He was confused and asked the owners of the house what happened to it. The owners said that there never was an other room, and that there was just pipes behind that wall. He said he was sure it used to be there, and that brought back a lot of memories for me. I suggested getting in contact with his mom to figure out what could have happened, but he seemed confused when I said that. He said that he never lived with his mom. It was just him and his dad. They divorced before he was born. I told him that couldn't be true because I spoke to his mom and remembered her. He said whoever that wasn't his mom. She had never been to that house. He said he'd seen a woman laughing at him from under the covers in his room. She'd say things like, "I'm gonna pull you in." On those nights, he'd sleep in the other room. He said he also didn't like that room. He said a ghost lived down there, but he was less scary than the woman upstairs. Then who was Harry's dad? Harry said he didn't know him too well. He'd spend most of his time in the basement where no one could see him. Last of all, why was Harry so upset that the other room was no longer there, if he never even liked that place? He wouldn't say. The line just stayed silent, and then he hung up. Just before he hung up, I swore I heard someone say, "Keep listening," on the other end. This has certainly been a weird experience. I don't know what to think. Maybe someone else can explain what happened. Anyway, for now, goodbye.